Hello and welcome to Ignore All Previous Instructions. I'm Pam and I'm here today with David Dylan Thomas. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. My name is David Dylan Thomas, and I am at least two things. I am a professional speaker, workshop giver, usually on to the topic of inclusive design. And more recently, I am the writer and director of White Meat, which is a zombie film about what happens when a bunch of undead uh, corpses of slaves underneath Washington Square Park. And this is true. There are a bunch of enslaved people buried underneath Washington Square Park from back in the day. What if they all come back to life one night as zombies, but they only eat white people? So that's White Meat, and that's what I'm currently working on making now.
And very topical for this here spooky season.
Yes, very much so.
So yes, and for people on YouTube, is Dave does have the shirt. Can they get the shirt
So if you want this
if they
shirt,
want to?
all you have to do, we are doing a short film for starters, and we are doing a Kickstarter campaign for that short film in Black History Month 2025. One of the rewards, if you contribute, is this T-shirt. So,
There you
and
go.
if you want, you can even lock in your slot now. We're doing something called pre-crowdfunding, which I just learned about, where you try to get as many people to pledge in advance to contribute on day one, because it turns out the amount of contributions you get on day one really matters. So the big thing I'm
Yeah,
doing now is
I mean
getting
that's how you
people.
can reach people not in your immediate audience. Like you get
Exactly,
it to
exactly,
trend, you get it to yeah.
exactly. So if we can open day one with a big number, so much the better. So I'm encouraging people now. If you go to whitemeatmovie.com, you'll see all this info. But I'm encouraging people to contribute, or not contribute, but to pledge to contribute on day one. And one of the levels is this T-shirt.
There you go. So how did you so I know you've been, one of the things I was looking around at, because we've known each other for quite a long time at this point.
At
And
least 10
I
years, probably
I
more.
know. I know. And you've been making movies for so long. So in my Gmail of the, film projects I have been in touch with you about that did developing Philly and there was no season two.
Yeah, so developing Philly is a so at the time we called it a web series. These days we call it a limited docu series because that sounds fancier. But right,
Oh, okay.
because it makes it sound like it's
Well, and I
HBO
guess,
and shit.
well, sure. And I guess a web series now, that's funny you say that because, yeah, at the time it was I'm making a web series, but now it's a docu because everything is web, right?
Well, that's the
Everything defaults to
thing.
web. So,
I
like,
used
if
to
you say web series, I default to fiction in the same way, like a book is a novel is a fiction.
Well, yeah, and it's so funny too. Like, just to digress for a second, when I still remember like 20 years ago at South by Southwest, there was a panel about webisodes, right? And like people just doing early stuff on the web, like Felicia Day was doing the Guild
Yeah.
just on the web, not on any
Yeah.
kind of. This is before Netflix was streaming. It's before streaming period. So, and I remember like in the Q&A asking her, "Hey, do you think like right now webisodes are something people make when they can't make like a legit quote
Hmm.
unquote TV show? Do you think there's going to come a time when people prefer to make stuff for the web?" And she was like, "Absolutely." And here we are. And the two
I
things
think
are
so.
basically the same.
Yeah. And it's that confluence of, oh, if I'm creating a thing and doing most of the work, what if I want to capture most of the value?
Well, that was the thing, right? And
Whoa.
that's always the thing about a new technology is that it, for a brief window anyway, gives like the workers the means of production, right? It gives this like window of like actually seeing the benefits. And then along comes YouTube and then along comes TikTok. And it's like, well, let's have some of that money, please.
Well, yeah, and centralization and distribution is a way to for them to insert their middle people.
Exactly, exactly. It's
And
only
and
five
they do
minutes.
provide value,
Oh no, they
but
absolutely do. And honestly, I think, and I've been saying this since then, they're offering a better deal than you're going to get from like Paramount, you know,
sure.
and you're going to get a lot
Yeah.
more control. But it is still a hustle, right? We're still swimming in capitalism. It's still going to be this thing. So yeah, but it is interesting to see how the early web, and especially the early video web, because I was in there. I was in like 1997, 98. There was this thing called like broadcast.com that like
Because you've been making movies
oh
forever.
god, I,
Like
I'm
that's
I'm old. I'm old
that's
as
like that's
fuck.
why
I'm
it's
like
funny when you describe so we were recently in an event, and you were talking about white meat. And the thing is that, I also know you from the tech industry, but then, knowing you and some of your collaborators, like you've been making films since you were like a kid.
Oh yeah, I made
Like,
movies back
but
in high school. Like, and
right.
this is like I'm old as fuck, so this is like 1988 was my first movie,
You're,
right?
I gotta disagree with you. You're not. See, I volunteer at a community garden with a bunch of retired people, and the wonderful thing about them is that they always school me, and they're like, "No, you're not old." And so even you are not.
No, that
It's
is
like,
actually very true. And when I'm out, and I'll be honest, like I'll be out here, doing my thing, and then I'll be like, "Oh yeah, Martin Scorsese just made one of his best movies, and he's like 80 something." I'm like, "Okay, I
hmm
have some time. I can still get better at what I do." Like you never stop getting better. If you're an artist, you never stop getting better at what you do. So like,
right.
respect.
And also, oh, I think you'll like this. A friend of mine, she got it from somewhere else, but she described it was actually related to like a decision about like whether or not to have kids. But it
Mm,
was, um, what is life but a series of projects of arbitrary length?
yeah, I mean,
And
yeah,
that's what she said, was like when she decided that she didn't necessarily want the kid project for her. Do
yeah.
you want your 20 to infinite year project? Um, that's,
Well, and
you know,
I think that's very
choices.
wise. And the arbitrary
And
part
that's,
of it
or maybe you
is
do. Like, it's like
yeah.
20 years, like, especially as you get older, I'm like, 20 years, I could do a 20-year
Well,
project.
I will be honest. As I get older, a year doesn't seem like as much of a stretch of time as like it used to.
No,
Like it's like
a year
said,
is a minute, right?
yeah, and like when you're making movies, especially a movie like this, like 3 years would be like that. If I was able to
Right.
make a
Because
movie in
I
three
was
years,
asking you
that would
that
be
as my
unbelievably quick. And
timeline. Hmm.
exactly. And so like if I sit down and I say, okay, I'm comfortable with the fact that the earliest I believe this could get made, if everything goes beautifully, is like 2028, 2027, 2028. And I'm just like, I just sit with that. I'm like, okay, that's when it comes out. Because
Yeah.
2028 is going to come anyway. That's the thing. The time is going to pass no
Right.
matter what. At the end of it, would you rather have a movie or would you rather not? So
So I was tempted to draw us into another diversion because that's what I love doing when I talk to you. But it gives me an idea to divert toward, that there's this event that you run sometimes
mhm.
called the Idea Exchange.
Yeah.
And what's the question that you start with that event
Oh yeah. So the
on
question
the
I
name
start
tag?
with, yeah. So and I'll tell you that by way of the inspiration. So, um, my good friend Brad Graham, who unfortunately passed away in 2010, used to do an event at South by Southwest called Break Bread with Brad, and this is like early days of the web
Is
and
this where
South by
Dunkin'
Southwest.
Donuts with Dave came from?
Absolutely.
Another pilot that I participated
Yeah.
in.
Yes, so that's right. I remember that. I want to do one of those again. Anyway, so he would have like the opening night of South by Southwest. Now, keep in mind, this is early 2000s. South by Southwest Interactive is just a bunch of bloggers and nerds who don't see each other all year because they're all over the country, only see each other online, getting to see each other in
Right.
person for a week. That's it. There's no big
Yeah.
tech parties and crap. This is just so opening night. He would have this
No,
thing
no
called
Kid Rock. Anyway.
no Kid. No, we were so deprived. Um, so we get there, and
Anyway.
the opening night, you show up and you get a name tag, and instead of the name tag saying "Hello, my name is," it says "Hello, my URL is." Right, the early web, remember?
Inspiration.
So unfortunately, he
Where's
passed in
your blog?
2010.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. So in 2020, he
Hmm.
passed, and in his honor, I started doing an event called Dunk Donuts with Dave, and my name tag said, and this is the question is, lately I've been thinking about blank, and people would just fill that in,
Hmm.
and that evolved into an event that I do now called an idea exchange, sometimes in person, sometimes online, where you basically show up and you have that name tag, or in your Zoom meeting, your little thing that says, lately I've been thinking about, and whatever it is, right, that's what we'll talk about, and it was really
Hmm.
powerful because people like the first time I did it in Philly, I thought I was gonna have to give this big explanation at the beginning, but people just showed up, filled out their tag, and just started talking to each other. And these are
Yeah, I
like
think I might have been at the first
int-
one.
yeah, and these are like
Yeah.
introverts even who are like, because I can engage with you on the level of ideas, I don't have to have this awkward, what do you do for a living? And blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, we can just get into the things we
Yeah.
care about. And then maybe from there we get into what do you do or whatever. But it doesn't really matter because we're engaging with the things we care about. So I didn't have to explain anything. They just went into it. So that I'm very proud of that. I'm very like happy about that, and I'm also very steal this idea. Like, go do it
Yeah,
yourself. Just get a bunch of people and get a bunch. Like, you don't even need a lot of money. Like, oh, I only ever provide like coffee and donuts. That's it.
I know that's your main budget for these
Yeah, pretty
is
much. Yeah.
coffee and donuts. So the diversion that I thought I was thinking about time because we started
Yeah.
talking about time for a bit, and and although then that idea can give me another diversion too of thinking that by sharing ideas where we so like I think it also and fitly there's just like a little number in the corner of diversions counter just going up and up and up and up. But um in the discourse, like we or the internet, everyone's talking about everyone how neurospicy we all are.
Mhm.
Um or kind of like, well, if you're here, then the answer is yes. um uh but that rather than going through, so at talking about, hey, what have you been thinking about lately, instead of going through this undocumented, not very pleasant social mores of, please give me your outer exterior shell and I will share my outer exterior shell with you of how I wish you to perceive me in this interaction. And instead it's giving you a layer inside that sphere is theorying right now. But that's one reason why I think it to be so pleasant to think about. I rewatched your F engagement talk
Oh yeah, actually,
in
so are we allowed to curse here?
preparation.
Because I've already done it like twice.
Oh, have we? I don't pay attention, so it's like I think I hit the button for non-explicit, but
Okay,
there's probably
I'll
some bar, and also I'm not. Yeah, I think just yeah, probably fine.
okay, that's fine.
Um, but I was like, what? Anyway, but you mentioned, the dreaded word personal brand,
Oh yeah.
dark storm clouds ensue. And I mean, in the recording of the talk that I was rewatching, the Beyond Tellerrand, is
Mhm.
I think yeah. And it, you said something like, "Oh, how do you remember when you first heard personal brand?" And I think I was so for me and my story, I was so young when I heard personal brand. I was just in this to to exist in a world where I still had the unearned hubris that I had of the past, and also just if someone told me a thing that I should do, I would just be like, "Okay, cool, I'll try it and see how it goes. And if I don't like it, I'll stop." And so I, did the personal brand thing and got like, you know, into it in a way, and it's like I don't know, it only occurred to me after some years how icky it is.
Yeah.
And
And
like yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, and I like same with me, right? Like, I was probably hawking the idea of personal brand at the time, right? Because I was an
Oh yeah,
influencer,
with your
which is
content
another
strategy,
word we
yeah.
don't love, right? But and I think I don't know, I get very of two minds about these things because like it's real, and it was real before it was a term, right? Like even before we had the internet, people had personal brands. They had things that you
Sure.
identified with them, that you associated with them when you heard their name or saw their image. That was just, I mean, that is to a certain extent, all of these things are just that's the way humans work, right? We
Yeah, is
consolidate.
that we
We
simplify to because we can't remember the to we can only to be known, which like you don't necessarily want to be known by too many people. That's actually overwhelming and kind of scary.
sure,
You want to be known by a few, maybe a
and
handful.
the more people who know you, like it's almost like compressing a video file. It's like I don't have time for all that. Give me just the short version of who and what you are, so when I see you, I know what to think about you. Right? So much of
Hmm.
prejudice, so much of whatever comes down to just a simple, like going back to time, just a simple task problem of like, look, I only have so much time to decide how to react to you when I see you. So just give me the bullet points. And so personal brand becomes a sort of codified, capitalized way of saying, when I think of Dave, I think of this, right?
Yes,
And if I want to make money off
right.
of that, that's when we
And
start calling it personal brand.
well, because this circle is tied in together with, so you say the personal brand thing on the talk, and then I had looked and saw I'd actually told you no on to you'd asked about interviewing me for Developing Feely season 2 because you asked about, hey, can I talk to you about tech and gender? And I said no, because I more so at that time. Now I'm on team ignore all previous instructions, and I'm kind of doing whatever.
Uh-huh.
um, but the phrase, it can be helpful. Maybe I'm in an expansive moment at this time, but I like the phrase that I was employing at that time and for, many years, like kind of crafting a career around be careful what you're good at. And
Yeah.
so be
Yeah.
careful what you're good at. And especially as a woman in the tech field, if you talked about gender, that's all you would talk about. And that's
Now,
not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about different things other than the fact that I happen to identify with the gender that I was assigned with at birth. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's, it's,
No, and I
we're fine with it.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. Certainly now more than then, and to a certain extent. So you were saying before we never did season two. So to explain to folks who didn't know what season one was, Developing Philly was a web series, docuseries,
Sure.
whatever.
Very niche Philly
Uh,
stuff.
yeah, about the basically the rise of the tech scene in Philly.
Yeah. Website's
And
still up.
yes, yeah, you can go to
Props to
developingphilly.com
that.
and see all of the episodes. We actually recently did an event at Philly Tech Week that was like the 10-year anniversary of, or maybe it
Oh,
was, no, it's
nice.
15-year, yeah, 10-year anniversary of
Yeah.
Developing Philly. And people are
At
still being
least,
inspired
yeah.
by it today. My producing partner, Maurice Gaston, and I were super humbled by that.
Oh,
But the
that's
idea
wonderful. That's
was
great.
season two. So season one is fairly laudatory of the tech scene, not super critical of it. I mean, it's definitely looking
Look
at
what
trying
we
to
have
understand
here.
it and sort of understand
Sure.
where did it come from and how are people behaving in it and how is it different from other tech scenes. But it wasn't hypercritical. And then toward the end of the final episode, we start to bring in a few more critical voices and we start talking. Literally, the last shot, spoiler alert, is a map of the city's broadband distribution. And you notice all the poor areas ain't got no internet, and it's sort of like the
Hmm.
teaser, right, for
Oh,
season
definitely
two.
then, especially.
Right.
Hmm.
So season two was going to be about, okay,
Access is not equal.
yeah,
Hmm.
where is this tech scene that we've lauded in season one? What does it owe Philadelphia? Right. And where is it falling short? Right. And the three areas we really wanted to get into was education, gender, and I forget what the other one was. But in any case, we had all these different things that had to do with power. Right.
Yeah.
How are people trying to move power from one place to another in this situation? And so, obviously, one of the places, if you're going to talk about power in tech, is you're going to talk about gender. And so, I don't think we really
Hmm.
appreciated, I know we didn't really appreciate what we were necessarily asking when we were approaching people to say, hey, would you like to come talk about gender in tech? I mean, I think we did on one level
Mm.
because we weren't like angry if somebody said no. It'd be like, okay, like I get it.
No, yeah, it was chill. Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
definitely like we were thinking more from like almost like an expertise standpoint than a risk standpoint
Hmm.
of like, oh, I've heard Pam talk about this before. Like I know she has opinions. So if she has opinions,
Oh,
I want to hear
do
those
I have
opinions. Let's get her
opinions?
on camera, right? Versus, okay, well, what is the consequence for her of expressing those opinions versus the consequences for us of putting those opinions out there? I don't think that was forefront. It wasn't nowhere, but it wasn't forefront when we were approaching people about that because we would have some of those conversations and we would have people sort of maybe even hedge their bets a little when we interviewed them. I mean, that wasn't why the second season never came to pass because A, it was too much to bite off, and B, we had like other shit going on. And we ended up running bar
Sure.
camp. Like that was actually the thing that took over our lives
Mm.
because
Guess that
of
that the
developing
little
Philly.
conference in Philadelphia.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So bar camp, which is like one of my personal favorite conferences, period. Maurice and I were given because of developing
Barcampphilly.org.
Philly. Yes, barcampphilly.org. Come, it's awesome. They're going to start doing more events. But we were given that opportunity specifically because we were able to pull off developing Philly. So that also sort of like was a time, not a time suck in terms of a waste, but time suck in terms of we don't have as much time
No,
to go
but
interview a whole
other
bunch of
thing
people
appeared.
and do like,
Yeah.
because it was going to be like The Wire, but for the Philly tech scene. And it's like, that's a lot. It's a great idea, but it's a lot.
Yeah. But then, you know, like most ideas aren't too late, they're too early. That's another
Well, that's
favorite
the thing. There was
phrase.
so much
But well, because
more.
when you say now there's so many more dramas, that's what I'm thinking is like there's so many more dramas of like things I haven't watched that I think will be too triggering.
Oh,
But
sure.
the like that I've heard that there's the Uber one There's, obviously The Social Network, things I haven't
Mm.
seen because I think they'll be too triggering.
Oh, sure.
Um, I only watched the show Silicon Valley because I was trapped inside during the pandemic. Like that was how I watched all of Silicon Valley, and it was funny, and I thought it was, I don't know what's his name, Michael, the writer
Oh, the guy who
of
did
Office Space
Beavis and
and
Butthead, and
Silicon
I'm blanking on
Valley.
his name right now.
Oh,
Look it
he
up.
did.
Just look it up.
Yeah, it's like, but who he, like how he just stays, I guess, because I wonder about this in art making of
Mhm.
that, or generally that if you're making art about something and perhaps the art making becomes more of a percentage pie of what you're doing, then do you lose attachment, like a lose perspective on the thing that you were
Mm.
talking about? I think about, this is going to be a little shady, but Hannah Gadsby,
Mhm.
who I loved in the net as everyone else did, her specials or their specials, unsure. But Hannah Gatsby's specials following the net, I think were less good. And I think part of the reason they were less good is because Hannah Gatsby's style is to talk about, lived experience. And
Mm.
if you become rich and famous, your lived
Right.
experience is not sorry, less interesting to me,
Sure. Well, it's less relatable, right? No, I mean that's a classic
less
problem, right? It's like
relatable.
your first album is super personal and talks about things that people can relate to because you were poor when everyone else was
Because you're just
poor,
a regular
right?
person.
Your second album, what you have to draw on is being rich and famous, and there's like 10 other people who can relate to that. So that, I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
That having been said, specifically on Hannah Gadsby, I saw Douglas, and yes, I agree it's not as good as Nanette. And part of that is just like, yeah, and Fall of the House of Usher isn't as good as Midnight Mass, but that's because Midnight Mass is fucking perfect. Oh, sorry, is perfect. And like, and Fall of House of Usher is amazing, but nothing is going to be Midnight Mass. It's sort of like, I actually really like Douglas, and I think this sort of like baller move of like, I'm going to tell you how this show is going to go, which he does at the beginning. Literally
That,
every single
yes,
joke I'm going to tell and
that's
how it's
good.
going to and what you're going to laugh at, and it still works. I'm like, okay, hats off. You called your shot and you took it and you
It's
got it
true. Very good at
right.
crafting a
But
story.
is that as good
And
as
yeah.
Nanette? No, but that's like, yo, like I try not to. I feel like I'm a very generous viewer, so I try not to
Hmm.
only look at the context of previous work when judging the work, but I will also, it's sort of like a yes and. Yes, I thought this was an
Hmm.
excellent special, and it's probably not as good as the net. I will be
Yeah.
shocked if she
And,
is ever,
you
even
know,
if she
you
becomes
got to keep making
poor,
things.
right? Even if she like loses all her money and starts living lives like us and is able to relate again, like if that's the factor that's making it less good, I still don't see her making another Annette because Annette is so damn good. Because lots of
Yeah. And
people
then
who
that's,
can relate
well,
to
and
us
there you
make
go. Then
art
that's,
that isn't that good.
yes. Well, and then there you go. That's the, that is its own flavor of curse. Like that, you know, what JD Salinger and Catcher in the Rye, at least this was the rumor that I heard, was
Mhm.
famously wrote it very young and was only ever known for that. And he really didn't like that. It
Yeah,
felt
it could
like
be.
he felt like he couldn't make any art because it's like, oh, you did this great thing. So it can be, so I think continuing to make things,
Yeah.
that's all those like, a healthy artist is someone who's making, a healthy
Hmm.
creator, a healthy creative, because now creator, oh man, it also gets into, you said influencer. It's, words don't matter except that they very much do.
Oh,
And,
sure. Yeah.
and that language and linguistics, and this is why they're fun and topical things. I just read something today, the Angry Grammarian, so
Hmm.
Jeffrey Barberg, but this person who used to have a column in the Philadelphia newspaper, who now has a Substack, also has a grammar musical. It's pretty funny, and but wrote their Substack that I read today is references passive voice as
Mm.
a tactic in this here. So currently there's the lead up to the U.S. election. It's like it's almost like a horse race, in that like a horse race is 2.5 minutes tops. Most horse races, so it's like all of this lead up for voting which is, a thing that lasts now with, with early voting and things, I guess you could say it lasts 6 weeks. But, we've been building up to this for years. And so, and I lost my thread. Hopefully you have
No,
one.
that's fine. Although I will throw in my own critique of referring to elections as horse races. Caveating that for some people, it truly doesn't matter in that they're in a gerrymandered district where it's difficult for
Mm,
them to affect things. But I am of the
sure.
opinion that voting does matter. Um, so
Oh, I mean, same.
if voting does
Yes.
matter, then calling it a
Hmm.
horse race is disingenuous because in a horse race, you don't get to decide who wins. You get no say in who wins the horse race. That's the whole reason
True.
you bet on it, is because you don't know the outcome. Imagine if you get to actually vote on which horse wins the race. Okay, that's the analogy. So it is this very, going back to passive voice, it's this very
Okay.
disempowering, not blaming you for that, but it's a very disempowering metaphor, like by design, frankly, because it gets you focused on making it seem like a sport,
Mm-mm.
like a
That
sports
is, it's a thing that
analogy.
I'm watching. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I wonder, and it gets you focused on like, oh, that was a bad move, that's going to cost them, and this and that and the other, and it's like, you get
Yeah.
to
You gamble on a
choose.
horse race,
You
but your
actually
money
get
has
to
no
influence
impact
this.
on it. Yeah.
This isn't two
Yeah.
boxers in
I,
a ring that you're watching slug it out. No, you get to decide. No matter what they do. No matter what they do, you get to pick.
are you talking about democracy?
It's
Is that you
okay.
talking
I'm
about
just talking
democracy?
about democracy, and
I'm
I
just
can
talking
dig
about
it.
democracy. I
No,
did.
it's
I so
yeah.
I do want to issue an in time correction. I use my little pocket computer, and I at least on the Wikipedia page, Hannah Gatsby uses they them pronouns at
Oh,
least
okay.
as far
Yeah.
as I'm checking. So I just wanted to
Excellent.
fact check ourselves. So
I was
oh
told there'd be
so
no fact
Catherine.
checking. Ba-bing!
Oh, that's a callback to the pre-show.
Yes, yes, yes.
But also to earlier in this in this show about time, we could get real philosophical here. So, do you believe time is linear?
That's highly doubtable. I mean, we experience it as linear-ish sometimes. What about when we're
I think,
dreaming? How do
yeah,
we
I think
experience
it's,
time
I think
then?
it's an, oh, I
Right?
even think
Like
in like regular reality
even in regular
that
reality,
it's,
right? Like I think we experience it mostly linearly to stay sane. So one of the other things I haven't
yeah,
mentioned is that I wrote a book called Design
it's
for
this
Cognitive
agreement.
Bias, right? And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things I get into in that book, and I'm going to recommend another book here that you might love called The User Illusion by Tornary
Mm,
Archers, which really goes deep on this topic. But it's basically about how your mind is excellent at fooling you. So who
yes.
knows what time
Well,
actually?
I would say your mind is excellent at fooling you, at least for my belief about my own
Mhm.
mind. I trust that my brain is trying to keep us on the rails.
Oh no, no, no! It's doing it for a good reason. So
That's,
the simple example is touch your nose and your toe at the same time. You feel it at the same time. You shouldn't. It should take a little bit longer for the impulse to get from your toe to your brain than from your nose to your brain. But your
oh,
brain knows
so
that would freak
close.
you out. So it
Yes.
says, hey, nose impulse, hold on. Wait for the toe to get here. All right, you're both here. All right, go on. Right? It's for your own good, but it's
Interesting.
not real.
Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm.
So if that's what it's doing just to deal with like nerve impulses, who knows what it's doing to time? Actually, I'll give you another example. There's this great thing called the binding problem, which is scientists trying to figure out your body is basically covered in sensors. And for your brain to
Mm-hmm.
process all those sensors like touch, taste, all these things in real time,
Mm-hmm.
like it
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. That like it actually takes time to process all of that. And they
Mm.
calculated it somehow to be basically half a second. So they're like, okay, that means we're experiencing life on a half second delay. All of us. Oh, your brain basically like a TiVo time shifts your experience back a half second so you don't go insane. Like, so you want to talk about time and experiencing time? We have no clue. Like
I
we
know.
just muddle along and we come up with an agreement about time that means that when you say, Dave, can you be here for this podcast at this time? I can say sure,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll come pretty close to showing up in the same place in the same time. Even this exchange that is in real time is a bunch of electrons going through a thing,
Right.
coming out the other side. And you're not looking at me, you're looking at your computer's best guess at what I look like. Like all of this, when you take a minute, is like, oh, I'm really glad my mind just cuts out the middle person and is like, I'm just going to give you a
Yep.
simulation that's workable. Trust me, you don't want the alternative.
Yeah. There was so at my little co-working space that I go to, they had a would you rather board up, and I was very disturbed that there. So the would you rather that I found the most interesting to me was would you rather A, when you wake up, all of your nightmares are real that you had the night before.
Mm.
B, you don't have the ability but to distinguish between dreams and reality. And
Ooh.
let me tell you, I'm going to spoiler that at that co-working space, many more check marks on the can't tell dreams from reality side. I was shocked because I'm
I
so. Would you choose that? I would choose A.
I would choose A. I wouldn't be happy about it, but I would choose A because I think to
I could
me,
prepare. I'd be like, oh, the giant worm, let me get my backpack. Like,
yeah.
I would know. Like,
Well,
for
and
an
there's
anxiety situation, that's like,
yeah, and
oh, no,
maybe
the
this
dream I
is
know about.
well, yeah, and maybe this is I mean, I suffer from depression and anxiety, and I've got therapy
Mm-hmm.
and medicine for that, and best choice I ever made. But I don't know if it's
Mm-hmm.
coming from that place, but like I am terrified with full knowledge that it's a non-zero chance this happens. I am terrified of dementia, right? And there's every reason to
Oh,
believe that's something that will eventually happen. Like it's common enough. I
I've
wouldn't
got a
go so
bunch
far
of
as to
bad
say
news
it's
for you,
likely,
DDT.
but
Well,
it's
actually, it is. I got a bunch of bad news for you. So I want to share, since you
mhm.
brought that, I want to interject immediately that my father has dementia.
Okay.
And so I am somewhat intimately,
Yeah.
and my father's only 72 years old. So my father's 72 years old and has dementia. Again, my senior citizens I volunteer with, a good number of them are older than him.
Yeah.
He was in a car accident in the 80s. Like it's if you've had a head injury, you're much more likely to have it, especially sooner.
Mm,
Um, here's the bad news for you. Trigger warning dementia. We're already here.
sure.
Hit that skip button. Is 8 out of 10 people will develop dementia if you are so lucky to reach that age. So it is not if but when.
Right.
And
Right.
so, but I think what you were about to say before, I did want to make sure that you knew that that is personal to me.
Sure. Sure.
And so, but that um, what I think you were about to say is that, and watching even me talking about that this is my, as being a caregiver, both like I went there earlier this year and was a caregiver up close, and then now, long distance caregiving. And that even just hearing about someone with dementia, it really freaks some people out. And the idea, which actually also ties into our current election, um, but the in the US. So, but the yeah, people are very terrified to lose their own mind, which I think this will really mess us up, mess people up. But I think you have to let go of this idea that you had control over it in the first place.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of where this goes, right? But to answer, so A, I'm very sorry that you had to experience that. My mother and my grandmother both suffered from dementia before they died, so I also
Mm,
have very up close and
very up
early,
close.
because my grandmother passed away when I was like eighth grade, so very early
Oh, so you were young. Yeah,
witnessing of that. All of which to
yeah.
say, the idea of not being able to distinguish between reality and fantasy is
Mm-hmm.
terrifying to me. More
Mm-hmm.
terrifying than that giant bug or being possessed by
Yeah,
a demon,
yeah,
right? As
sure.
long as I know I'm
Like,
possessed by the demon and I'm not
yes.
suffering from schizophrenia, as long as I know,
Yeah.
somehow that's better. And that gets back to our need for certainty, right? That's just a human
Mm.
need. But that need for certainty also gets back to, yeah, my sweet summer child, you don't know the difference between reality and fantasy now. Right? Like if we're really getting real about
That's what
all this
I'm
sort of,
saying.
so in a
That's what I'm
way, it's a
saying.
false choice. It's a false choice to say, oh, your nightmares are real and you know it, and you don't know the difference between dreams and reality. It's like in both situations, if
Oh.
we're sticking to our understanding of how things work, you will never know the difference between dreams and reality, right? That is a false, that's like
Mm.
saying, it would have to be a fantasy choice of, would you rather be able to fly or shoot lasers out of your eyes? You can't do either, except in this
Yes,
scenario,
yes, yes. Well,
right?
yes, and that is the would you rather. Yes.
Right. So if we're staying in the world of fantasy, then yes, I would rather know that my nightmares are real than not be able to tell. Because then in that situation, I'm actually one up on reality. I'm now actually in a state where I can
That's what I'm
distinguish between
saying.
reality and fantasy. That's
Yeah,
the plus. Like, you're giving me a superpower in that one. You're just telling me the way things already are. You're basically, if you choose the can't tell the difference between dreams and reality, you're kind of just saying, I want things to remain as they are.
pretty much. The other thing I thought is that maybe people at the co-working space have some real messed up dreams.
Well, that's fair. I've had some. Like, I wasn't kidding about the giant bugs and the being possessed by a demon. Like, that shit freaks me out. I've had nightmares about that shit. I don't need that. I do not need
Your
that. But
fondness for horror movies.
yeah, yeah, that's the funny thing. I'm at the point now where horror movies don't really scare me anymore. Some have come close, and they can freak me out. And I can say that was some disturbing shit, but it
Mhm.
doesn't stay with me the way it used to. Like, the first time I saw The
Mm.
Exorcist, I was like, "Oh my god, Reagan's in the corner." I'm sure of it, and I could not sleep. Like, if I go to sleep, demon will possess me. Like, that was just full stop. And I've become a nerd, I guess, to where like I can appreciate the horror and appreciate the emotions the horror brings up without keeping it with me when I go to sleep. Now what keeps me up is like the election.
Yeah. But yes, yes, yes. So anti-capitalism is a
Yes.
topic that you have been on lately. And when when I was rewatching your talk, something I wrote down was that you described how we got to now and unpleasant things, and how engagement, the concept of like engagement, and always like aiming for that in the current web era, but even in times before that, that we trended away from the collective and more toward the self.
Mm-hmm.
And that you said you credited that to capitalism. And when because you were mostly talking about, in the history section, you were talking about Europe a lot. And I was wondering why you chose capitalism when you could have chosen, say, the Catholic Church.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think capitalism is the most ready target, and it was what specifically Condi Ronk. So to give folks an overview, this is a talk called "No Seriously F Engagement," and if you want to find it online, it's at YouTube on my channel in the talks playlist. But or just Google "No Seriously F Engagement."
Mm-hmm.
The arc of the talk starts out with this idea of, we have a very thing centered web right now that causes a lot of harm, including literally genocide. And then on the
Mm-hmm.
flip side of that, what if we had a people centered web, and what would that look like? And I start talking about models for people centered societies, looking mostly at indigenous American societies, although there's plenty more examples like the Wendat and the Siksika. So where Europe comes in is specifically that a lot of what we call the Enlightenment was brought about by indigenous European discourse, intellectual discourse, which I didn't even realize was a thing that had happened, but it did very much so in like the early days of settler colonialism. And there's this indigenous critique of European living. Now, I think, and it goes along the lines of, hey, why are you Europeans making yourselves so miserable to get wealth, to get money?
Mm-hmm.
We're doing just fine without all of that. And it seems to be making you have to be forced to do good, right? Because capitalism
And
is
that
telling
was the
you,
thing. That was when you said the force to do good. That's what made me think,
yeah, yeah.
why didn't
So
you tie this to theology? Why economics, not theology?
And I do think the two are related. So, really, the question is, why didn't Kandiaronk tie it to Catholicism? Because I'm really sort of going off of his thing. But his thing
Fair.
was, you're making yourselves miserable to get all this money, and it's
Yeah, he
also making
identified
you,
wealth. Right.
yeah, and it's also making you treat each other horribly and be forced to do good. Why? And the idea is that all the things you do, you have basically capitalism is the motivation from on high to get as much wealth as possible. But in order to do that, you could do things like kill, you could do things like steal. And so the state's like, whoa, we can't have all that going on. So we're going to create laws that make you be good versus just being good because it's good, which is what Kandiaronk was a Wendat strategist, this brilliant indigenous American. So all of which to say, I think that if Kandiaronk had given the same critique maybe 100 years earlier, when the Catholic Church was putting down a mandate to go and quote unquote civilize and convert the West,
Right.
right? Which basically, if one document signed the death warrant for 90% of the Western Hemisphere, yes, 90%, during the
Yeah.
1500s, it was a papal bull that basically said, hey, go thou and conquer, right? The God is
Yeah.
telling you, God through me, the Pope, is telling you, it's cool. They're not really people. And you can
Yeah.
either save them, and if they won't be saved, you can kill them. Totally cool. God's cool with it. Go. In
Hmm.
fact, he's not just cool with it, he's telling you to do that. So, absolutely the Catholic Church, but still
But
in the
possibly in a
sense
different
of,
era. I think that's a fair.
well, a different era, but also the same basic motivation of collecting wealth.
Hmm.
Like the Catholic Church wasn't doing that because they woke up one morning and said, gee, I sure hate indigenous
No.
people. They woke up one morning and said, we want more. Like they were, it's funny, my kid right now, my son Kieran is right now studying European history. And I'm really getting an appreciation for, I don't think we in this day and age really have an appreciation for just how powerful the church used to be.
Yes.
I mean,
That's
they
what I was gonna
were,
say. It's not, is that not to another word you said earlier, like talking about power.
yeah, they were corporations, presidencies, and monarchy all rolled into one. Like
Hmm.
they were it,
Hmm.
especially in Europe. And it took like
Only one's allowed to
we
be
we we
literate.
complain
Hmm.
about monarchy, but man, it was hard for monarchy to wrestle power away from the church. That there were wars,
Yeah.
many bloody wars fought over wrestling power away from the church. All of which to say, at the end of the day, it's about power. It's about amassing wealth. And this, and again,
Hmm.
it's important to understand for Kandiaronk, for the Wendat, for the Siksika, there was a fundamentally different relationship between people, which said people are born basically good. People are born basically deserving of love and protection. Nobody's really better than anyone else, and there's no advantage in having more than somebody else. In fact, it's weird if you have more things than somebody else, because don't we all need things, and why aren't you giving those things so that everybody has things? Like that was just a fundamentally different assumptions. In a lot of Europe, the fundamental assumption was it is good to have more things than other people. In fact, the people who have more things are probably better. And so some people are better than others, and you can tell who, if you're Calvinist, you can tell who has the most stuff, and so it's good to have
Hmm.
more stuff. And if you're coming and people are not born good, they're born evil, literally original sin, right? And so you got to prove you're
Right.
good. God doesn't want you as you are. Prove that you're good. Convert to this, convert to that. Work hard, make me money, right? If you're coming at it from the
Right.
perspective of everybody is not equal and they have to prove their worth, of course I'm going to say get as much wealth as you can, but here are the guidelines. And those guidelines can come from the state, those guidelines can come from the church, whatever, doesn't matter, as long as
Hmm.
we can all agree that some people are better than others. And I think that's the fundamental difference. And I agree. I think if Kandiaronk had come along earlier, he would have probably been looking at more, he would have been saying, instead of, why are you ruining yourselves to get rich, he'd probably say something like, why are you ruining yourselves, making yourselves miserable to look good in the eyes of
For
God?
like that guy in Italy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some old dude in Italy told you to do some stuff. Um,
We had so much respect for old dudes in Italy back in the day.
so uh, um, yeah, it made me think of, so the I went to a Buddhist talk some years ago with Angel Kyoto Williams, one of the authors, the lead author of Radical Dharma.
Mm.
And I can't remember, it's probably in my journal somewhere, but in the Q&A, it was like a perfect, trifecta of Q&A where there was, some old white dude who asked a question that was essentially, you talked about all this, radical dharma and, approaching Buddhism from an anti-racist lens and from, especially being, Buddhist in the United States, and how Buddhism as, shock, it all goes back to power. But anytime, there's an organization, anytime there's centralization of power, not cool stuff has happened. And so this person asked Angel Kiddo Williams, aren't people just, predisposed to violence. And that's exactly what she said, was she was like, well, you first have to start from right thinking.
Mm.
And you have to start from, like, you and I are starting on, if that's where you're coming from and where I'm coming from, we're starting on not the same place. And so I'm saying, like, I believe that, or, and me, like, me personally, subscribe to a Buddhism or spirituality that we're all already enlightened, and you just have to figure it out. That it's already there, and it will be overwhelming and underwhelming at the same time. That it's because it's very overwhelming to realize that we're all part of the same organism and we're all interconnected. And if someone's suffering over there, then I'm also suffering, and that we're really not all free until all of us are free. And that's very overwhelming, but also was already true before you realized it.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, the point of that talk, even though I get very like on a hill about anti-capitalism, my main point, or where what I really want people to walk away from, is a sense of our interdependence. Like I introduced this concept in
Yeah.
the talk called interdependent design, which is really just a con to get you to think about interdependence. And
Yeah.
what I say is better or different about interdependent design as opposed to inclusive design or whatever universal design or any of these things are, is that inclusive design is trying to achieve something that isn't there yet. Like this is not an inclusive design. I
Yeah.
want you to make it
It
inclusive.
also kind of sounds like that it sounds othering, I would say.
Yeah,
Like inclusive
it
design,
works.
it can in its, in language, and it's that it's inclusive design can imply that I am included, but someone else is not yet.
Mhm.
And so I need to expand the tent rather than, you know, like there's still levels when they don't have to be necessarily.
Yeah, and it's so it's reaching for something, right? And whereas interdependent design is acknowledging something that's already true. We are, and I go back to Baldwin, James Baldwin for this, who said we live in a world that's just unequivocally interdependent. It just is. It's not. I don't
Mhm.
have to make the world interdependent. Like I always, I have a where I'm sitting. I can see
It
a
was
tree.
already.
Right. I see a tree in my backyard, and that to me is the simplest example of interdependence. I breathe in oxygen that came from that tree. I breathe out carbon dioxide that that tree needs, and it just keeps going. And it's so fundamental. I don't even have to think about it. I don't have to wake up in the morning and say, "I really want to be interdependent today. I hope I can give that tree all the carbon dioxide it needs. I really hope that tree gives me the oxygen I need.
It's
Let's
gonna
really work it.
happen.
Let's really hustle. Let's really work at it today." It's like no, it's fundamental. That interdependence is happening right now. I'd have to fight to make it not interdependent. I would have to hold my breath or cut down that tree. If I just let it go, it'll just do its thing. And so when I think about interdependent design, what I usually think about is subtraction. What do I take away from the design to
Hmm.
acknowledge the interdependent that's already there instead of adding in a whole bunch of stuff that's going to muddle and get in the way of that interdependence? So going back to your thing of like, it was there all along. It's just a matter of,
Hmm.
the scales falling from your eyes, to use a Christian metaphor, ironically, to
Mm.
see what's already there.
Yes. Yeah. The thing that came up for me just then is thinking about that when we inhale, that it's actually a relaxing action.
Mm.
That when you breathe, like as human beings, when we breathe, I don't know how other breathing works. Um, I don't probably know how human breathing is anyway, but uh, that it's actually a relaxing of the muscles. It allows you to
Mm.
breathe in,
I didn't know
and
that.
the exhalation is where muscular action happens.
Huh.
So if you're ever, if you're in yoga class or doing whatever and you're doing breathing, that is actually when I breathe in, and like out is actually where action pushing outward,
The diaphragm
but
is
the
pushing
in,
down to get the air out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So the yeah, and there's probably some nice animations that can show you this.
Sure.
But the the breathing action is actually relaxing. And that's why there is, a breathing exercise that is just focusing on the exhale and just pulling
Mm.
in. And because if you like, you will inhale, you will, it just will happen.
So
And
when you
so
hold
it's
your
a,
breath, you're basically not exhaling.
yeah,
Okay, interesting. Okay.
or when if you've exhaled and you're holding your breath out, you're remaining contracted.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, because it's a bellows, basically. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, like the dome of your diaphragm, etc.
Well, yeah, and it makes sense too because I used to take singing lessons, and they would always tell you to sing from here and
Mm.
to project from here because
From
that's the muscle
from your
working to
chest.
push to like just below your chest from your
Mm.
diaphragm. And even if you're just
Oh
doing
yes, yes,
speaking,
yes.
like you speak from your diaphragm, you're pushing air out from
Mm-hmm.
here. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
tensing a muscle to get more effort out. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We don't usually talk while we inhale.
That is a good point.
Can
There's like there's a Tenacious D track that's called Inward Singing, and it's Jack Black trying to invent a new form of singing, and he's like, I'm gonna sing while I'm inhaling and exhaling. And it's ridiculous because he's not
there
really,
are
but
no
it's
original
so
ideas. Um, dag nabbit.
but no, but I love that. And I've been practicing mindfulness meditation for a few years now. And I love that idea of
Mm.
just how much of it isn't effort to imagine something or to bring something into being, but how much of it is simply acknowledging that which observing. Like that idea,
Yes.
this is another thing. Like, and here's another thing that's wrong with our country and our generation, or whatever you want to, whatever
Sure.
cloud I want to yell at. Um, we have forgotten how, or I would say devalued just observation, right? We have to have an
Hmm.
opinion about everything. Like I still
Oh, okay.
remember
I'll let you
when,
keep going.
yeah, I still remember when there was the slap, and Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the
Oh,
Oscars, right?
I mean,
And everybody instantaneously came to a judgment, right? And then they had to share that
hmm.
judgment. No, like
Oh,
it
in the world that is the internet.
yes, in the world that is the internet, it was like boom,
Yeah,
boom, 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 boom. And
sure.
I'm not saying, it's a bit of a selection bias because if you did just
That's what,
observe,
yes. Because if you then you didn't say anything.
you wouldn't necessarily say anything.
Yeah,
But I feel like, and I do say I feel like I don't have evidence for this. I think this is more my hypothesis, is that because that's what's
sure.
visible, we feel compelled to have opinions the second we have an observation. Like the observation itself is not valued in and of itself. The observation is merely a pretext for the opinion. The opinion is the thing that matters. The opinion is, to go back to your thing more about the shell that we show each other,
Mm,
a lot of that
yes.
shell is this is what I like. This is what I don't like. They're judgments, not observations, right? So I think all of that individual, because the other thing I was going to say is like, yes, capitalism, but more so individualism. That's kind of the bigger problem, right?
Mm,
Capitalism is just kind of a manifestation of it. All of which to say, I feel like that need to make that our shell and devalues, I'll put it that way, simply observing, simply existing, right? Like I'll watch, again, I got my yard next to me. I'll watch a squirrel and I'll be riveted. And I'll be like,
oh
why am I
yeah.
riveted? It's just being a squirrel. It's not reporting. It's not giving
Because
me its
it's
hot. It's not giving me
amazing.
its hot take on the latest Marvel movie. It's not performing, right? It's just being a squirrel. And I'm like, if that
Yes.
squirrel can be riveting just being a squirrel, can human beings be riveting just being human beings? Have we even tried that?
Well, and then so to continue the meta, topics, the what do you mean when you say the word value in there? When
I
you say we
mean,
devalue, that we don't value observation, what does value mean?
value, I think, here is observed, perhaps inaccurately, and this is a whole other topic, by performance. What is the thing we're doing all the time? What is the thing when we observe,
Ah,
right? I observe people just giving their hot takes. And I think it's a little inaccurate. It is not just so that if you observe, I never know it. Because there's plenty of people who just take pictures of cool shit and put it on Instagram without any commentary at all. In fact, the early 88 days of Instagram was literally just
except
look
that
at this beautiful sunset, right?
they still took a picture and they still put it on social media
Oh, sure, but it didn't feel
versus
inadequate because
not
they
putting on
weren't.
social media or not taking a picture.
No, and that's true, but it isn't. But it isn't. It isn't sine qua non that if they took the picture and put it on the web, that they were in fact not simply observing, that they were in fact making a judgment, that the thing itself shouldn't exist on social media unless it offered a judgment on the thing it was observing. We're getting super Derrida right now.
Mm.
Um,
I know. I was like,
but
I want to pick up a tiny gavel and say more mediocre pictures on the internet,
well,
or
no,
not
right?
just fewer pictures
And
on the
there's
internet. But
plenty, and
like,
there's but all of it to say like there like I said, there's a
this sunset
selection
was just
bias.
fine.
Yeah, and I think that's great. But I think that, and to be honest, I feel like the early web was much more of that anyway. But when I say value, I do mean I feel like that people don't feel like it is enough too, that there is any value in simply posting a picture of a thing, simply noting, right? Because noting is a thing that you can do. I don't want to say performatively because that makes it sound like you don't mean it, but publicly. Like publicly noting things is
Yeah.
fine. And again, evidence of absence is an absence of evidence, or absence of evidence is an evidence of absence. But at the end of the day, I think that when I say value, I mean that people, I think there's an impression, and obviously you would need to kind of prove out this hypothesis. There's an impression that you are supposed to have an opinion on everything, whether you express it or not. You are supposed that there's no value in simply noting something. And I think the evidence
Right.
of
That
that
if you
really
post the
is
sunset,
that people,
the yeah. Oh,
I
that
think
if you
the,
post the sunset, the intrinsic, the assumed intention is that I liked this. It was pretty.
exactly, and that
That
you
there's
want
a
other
assumed
people.
judgment.
So it isn't just, and it isn't just a judgment. It's that I am now doing this to get people to agree with me. It is an
Mm,
interaction, right? I want likes. It's an engagement. It goes right back to engagement, right?
engagement.
And talk about
Hmm.
selection bias. We've built the platform specifically to value having a hot take and getting people to engage with that hot take,
Hmm.
preferably in the negative, because that actually is more people
Yes.
talking than if
Generates
everyone
more. Yeah.
agrees, right? So I think that's really what I'm saying when I think of value. I think of uh, uh, people. I think if people, I'll put it this way, I think if people did value just noting and observing more, people would be less stressed out. And we'd see much
Yeah.
less engagement, quote unquote, with candidates who say crazy stuff. Because if you were just observing that
Oh, buddy.
and not sort of coming to an immediate judgment on it, I don't know that it would be that compelling.
Mm.
Right? If you weren't obligated to have an
Oh,
opinion on every crazy every just ridiculous thing that happens in the world, right? Um, I don't know that you would then feel the need to then act on it, because that's what at the end of the day matters, is what action are you actually taking as or not taking as a result of that hot take, as a result of that reaction, versus honestly the inaction or at least thoughtfulness that might better pair with noting and observing. All of this
or
comes first, by the way,
the
but
word that came up is idleness, and I
well,
read
that's the
some
thing.
things
Yeah,
speaking positively of
yeah,
idleness,
yeah.
that we don't do enough idling. Not like do turn off your engine for your car, but like as human beings, like just what are you doing? I don't know. I guess I was just like that cloud looked really cool. Like I don't
I
know, or just like
honestly
not
think
even like I'm just existing, just a little bit
I
more
think
existing.
yeah, and I think that's a better place to make decisions from. I think that's really I think maybe again the evidence, quote unquote, the hypothesis, if I were to actually as a social scientist go through, I think the evidence of that lack of noting bears out in our decision making, because the decision making that comes from a place of fear, of instant reaction, of I gotta have an opinion and I gotta act on that now and I gotta get people to agree with me or disagree with me, and it matters so much what people think of me and people think of my opinions, because that's really all they know of me is my opinion, and on and on and on. Believe me, this was how I lived until I got on Lexapro, right?
Hmm.
That I was not noting at all. I was judging.
Mm.
I was taking in data and being
Oh,
like,
that's
okay, this is who I
exhausting.
am. Yes, for the other person too, as it turns out. Outsourcing your self worth, not a good idea. All of which to
Mm.
say, like, I suspect that if we spent more time noting, if we spent more time simply observing, simply existing, we'd actually make better decisions because we wouldn't be freaking out all the time.
I think we just did a very like that was a very pro meditation
Oh, yeah.
speech. That's,
I'm
I think
big.
this is like this whole section of the comment is very like, I mean, yeah, I've been meditating a long time, and a lot of people have a meditation practice and don't even talk about it. It's one of those things where I'm like more veganish now, but like as a past strict vegan, you don't actually have to tell everyone about it. The meditation practice. Um, you
That's
just
awesome. That's awesome.
you just do it, and then I have in the past referred to it as like CrossFit for my brain. And by that, I mean that it can be one of the most difficult things you can do, but you can have
Sure.
very good results from it. But that it's free. It's usually like you can probably safely do it without much harm coming to you. Three, it's free. um, it's like if a thing can help you so much and it costs $0, why not try it?
Yeah.
That's my speech. Well, something I did want to see if we could talk about. We had a talk a few months ago, and I think some of the things we talked about today we can tie into it. But had an idea, and I called you and said, I recently rewatched Network,
Mm,
and this idea. So Network is this classic film, and there's many ideas in Network, but one of them that I find captivating or really like haven't figured that out yet
mm.
is the by being a creator or a creative, since creator's gotten stolen, but but when you create something, and even if that something is critical of the system in which you're within, the system, because it's a system, will absorb it and make
Mhm.
it part of its own narrative because that's how systems work. And so that's, a network, or if perhaps people might be, there was a Black Mirror where there was the one with the cycling
Oh yeah, with
influencers.
Daniel Kaluuya. Yeah.
That was, I think, a very networky,
Yep.
become an influencer,
Yeah.
and then you become part of the machine that you were
Yep.
being critical of.
Yeah. It's very Marxist
And
dialectic kind of thing.
oh, say more about that.
Oh, so my crude understanding of the Marxist dialectic is that, revolution, new ideas come from the fringes, but are eventually co-opted by the center. And that's kind of how culture moves and works. It's like you get this thing on the fringes, like hip hop,
Just,
and
yeah,
then all of a sudden it's the biggest form of music in the world, but only after it's been co-opted by gigantic corporations and even by governments, right, to do its bidding. I think hip
right.
hop's a more interesting example because I feel like it's still very black, whereas other things kind of got drained of their blackness, like rock and roll, like as it got co-opted. But yes, the idea is
Mm,
that you start with something on the fringes, and capitalism in particular, because it is an extractive system, it'll take anything. Like we were talking about meditation, there is a meditation industry.
oh
This thing
my
that
goodness.
is
Oh,
about mindfulness and is
this is
free,
why I
like
had to
you
mention it
said.
being free twice.
You
It's
can
free
pay
twice.
lots of money to meditate, right? You can pay as much
That's
as
so
you want.
upsetting.
So that is, but that is its nature. It is like a virus isn't a great. It's more like cancer has the ability to do this thing called angiogenesis, where it takes existing blood cells and changes their DNA so that they grow toward it and feed it. Like that's what I think of. It's sort
Mm,
of like it's able whatever you throw at capitalism, it'll find a way to make money off of it. It's really good at that.
wow.
So yeah.
So many things. I would love a good biology metaphor because I'm really not schooled in
Oh,
biology, and
cancer is
that
great
like there's so
because
many things are you can analogize to, like also, yeah, nothing is new, that like there are natural processes for any process that you can think of,
yeah,
and
and the
then so
thing
that there's
about
some way to learn from it. Go
yeah, I was gonna
ahead, say
say, and
about cancer.
the thing about cancer, which I didn't understand, just said cancer's great. Cancer is not great, folks. I think you probably know that.
It's like I
But
haven't
what
picked the
makes it
tagline for this, and like
right?
the thing about cancer.
David Dylan Thomas says, "Cancer, yay!"
Like,
No, but the thing about which I didn't understand until relatively recently is like all cancer at the end of the day really is cells duplicating out of control. Like most cells will duplicate or
mm,
replicate into a certain point that's healthy and stop.
right.
Imagine if a cell just said, you know what if we just kept replicating, 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 replicating? Well, what happens? You start using up resources and you kill your host. So when people talk about like
Hmm.
rampant growth, constant growth as your goal, we need to keep getting bigger and bigger as a
Maybe
company without end.
that's
What does that sound
cancerous.
like? And
Hmm?
it has similar problems. And what does it do? It kills those. The other analogy that I love, I was just talking with my therapist about this today, is locusts. So people are familiar, I think, with the idea of locusts swarming and just decimating fields and fields of food, right? And this
Sure.
is this is a true phenomenon. It doesn't happen quite as often as you think. It's like maybe once every few decades, or like
Once every few apocalypse, it's
yeah.
fine.
It's not, but when it happens for real, like literally billions with a B locusts just going tear ass through miles and
It's
miles
terrifying.
and miles. But the thing I never thought of that I learned recently is what do you think happens when they've gone through all that decimating? They die.
Uh, yeah.
You literally just come upon a billion locust corpses. And I don't know
Yes.
what I
Also
thought
horrifying.
happened. I probably thought they're like, okay, well, they're done locusting now. They're going to go home with full bellies and like hang out and then go back to eating moderately. No, there's no more food. They die.
Hmm.
And so when you think about this like hyper rampant capitalism and just to consume as much as possible, get as much as you can, just keep going. It's fine. There'll always be more. No, there won't. And when it's
No.
done, you're just gonna die. That's it. Like
Hmm.
there's no like, let's all go to heaven. No, you're just gonna die. So it's like, not only does nature give us these nice examples, they also give us these nice lessons of, hey, how did it turn out for that cancer, really? Oh, its host died and then it died. How did it turn out for this locust? Oh, they ran out of food and they literally all died. Like, what
Hmm.
does that tell you about this current situation?
About the
Versus,
sustainability of
living in
the current plan.
harmony and like, hey, saying, okay, heart, you'll get this much blood, legs, you'll get that much blood, instead of saying, what if we gave all the blood to the left arm? It's God said the left arm is best, so we're just gonna give all the blood to that. That'll work out well for everyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The distribution of resources. But so network.
Yes, sorry.
It's like I wondered if you had any more thoughts on. So yeah, that was a good. Oh, that was now I'm just doing the little replay of that. On the infinite, the diversion counter just went to like a little infinite spinner, and
I feel like branching
and
timelines.
yeah, time's not linear. So which I have a good meditation for that, as I can tell you later. But so the yeah, so that ideas on the fringes, so that's the Marxist dialect, or
Yeah,
idea of the
exactly. Get
Marxist dialectic.
co-opted and brought in.
Is that
Exactly. Yeah,
so?
I think that's what it means.
And I guess then a question, if we process me process in real time, don't know what to do about that feeling. Like, why does it feel bad? Why does that feel bad in Network? Why does that feel bad in Black Mirror? Why does it feels bad because there's it feels some level of authenticity and truth has been lost, which is where, whoa, the power came from.
That is interesting because so first off, dear listener, dear viewer, please do yourself a favor and watch Network. It is just,
Uh,
and you'll be. This is a movie that came
it
out.
so stands up.
That's the thing.
It
This
stands
movie
up.
came out in the '70s, and with a couple switches, it could have come out today. And everything it's talking about, especially there's a speech from Ned Beatty that basically says there are no nations, there are only companies. Like, and it's like, oh, he saw it coming. Anyway, it
Hmm.
is frighteningly
The
powerful.
writer,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
writing
yeah,
team. Yes.
exactly. Um, Patty Chayefsky, just ridiculously good work, and Sidney Lumet doing a great directing. Anyway, um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think it feels bad because we don't like corporate. I mean, that's the weird thing is that we
But
don't like
but
corporate, and
corporate
everyone.
from money flow.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like corporate somehow gets to be the bad guy and keep the power anyway. right? Like we
Yeah.
so going so let me give you a really interesting, I think,
Mm.
example of that co-opting the thing. So there's a great video essay that talks about how Disney villains used to be royalty, right? The evil
Yes.
prince, the evil queen, the whatever, like some
Queen.
kind of monarch.
Hmm.
You get
Hmm.
to a shift in the past 10, 20 years where the villain is corporate. So most specifically, they point to the live action remake of Dumbo, and the villain in
Oh.
Dumbo behaves very much like Disney, comes in and takes this authentic
Hmm.
act and tries to corporatize it and exploit it and make money off of it. Now, Disney
Hmm.
is doing this knowing they are critiquing themselves, but also knowing that the market now has shifted from thinking royalty is bad, who cares about royalty, to thinking corporations are bad. And they know they can sell more tickets if
Sure.
they paint corporations as bad. So they have co opted that narrative from the anti capitalists, if you will, and made it a capitalist endeavor to paint themselves as bad. And I think this is really interesting for two reasons. One, it's that perfect Marxist dialectic, whatever. But two,
Hmm.
is that sustainable? Because keep in mind, we can't have it both ways. We say that media matters, we say that representation matters, right? So
Mm.
even if the thing they're putting out there is being put out there cynically, if media actually matters, if these big corporations really have influence, guess what? They are in fact now indoctrinating a whole lot of kids in anti-capitalism. And won't that be interesting when
Hmm.
it grows up? So I do
It
think,
already is. This is
right?
I've overheard, on the discourse of people talking to their younger colleagues or people in college talking about their first job, and they're asking questions and saying, what are these companies' priorities? I don't want to work for a company that doesn't care about its relationship to the environment because I care about my relationship to the environment and I care about living my values because they've been no, there's some hope for the kids.
Well, that's the thing. And guess what? Disney's to blame. Not solely, but weirdly, right? It's
But
weird that they're
weirdly,
kind of to blame. So all of which to say that I think it feels bad because we hate corporations. What were you gonna say?
oh, just I had I did think that, oh, this might be a good article to mention to DDT, and oh, which is how you're in my phone. Um,
No,
yeah,
I chose those
David Dylan
initials
Thomas,
deliberately.
DDT.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so that there was an article, controversial topic alert, about saying that the anti-choice movement there's been good news for me, turmoil in the anti-choice movement. They've had a bunch of kerfluffles inside their movement in the last few weeks, partially reckoning with that they were so focused, and they very much are winning in judicial, they're winning in the laws, but they are losing viciously in public opinion. That anti choice and, people who put on the cape of pro life, but really, want to control women's bodies and their choices, or yeah. Anyway, they failed to notice that they were so focused, and they people were murdered. There were terrorist attacks.
Oh
People
yeah.
were killed. Like, I was like Dr. Tiller died when I was in college,
Mm.
and like you know, seeing, this movement, so the experience for me reading that article of them having this reckoning of, which I think relates to what you were just saying of, well, it turns out possibly public opinion does matter eventually.
I
That
mean, let's hope.
hopefully, God willing, but in this horse race where we get to vote, and um, that turns out public opinion does matter. That they were so focused and they really did a lot of bad stuff to make a bunch of laws, and but they 80% of Americans are pro-choice, like higher than that possibly, it's somewhere in that neighborhood.
Mhm.
But and that's and polls are nonsense, like, but but that said, like, they know, that's where I thought this article was interesting, is that they realized and they reckoned, and like someone who was some man, of course.
Right.
Um, this is, this is an opinionated podcast. Some man, wrote some treatise as like he feels the movement hasn't worked. Like and he it's something he dedicated his entire life to. This movement that he believed in, which like I guess if you believe that and that is what you believe, it makes sense to dedicate your life to it.
Yeah.
But that he's caused a kerfluffle with his situation, saying we failed basically because we cared so much about this angle, but we didn't care about you know then meanwhile like the whole public opinion went the other
Well,
way.
well, here's the thing, right? I haven't read Project 2025, but I'll bet you at no point does it say give the
I haven't
people
read
what they
like the
want.
hundreds of them.
Right.
No,
At,
yeah,
at no
it's just
point,
it's really long. I have read a good chunk of it, but
I'm
yeah.
so sorry for you. But at no point do I guess that it says give the people what they want. The whole project of
No,
Christian nationalism isn't follow public
which is
opinion.
what that is.
Very much the
Mm-hmm.
opposite. The whole point of Christian nationalism is we know what's right, therefore we need to make it right. If most of the
Yeah.
country doesn't think abortion is good, F them, we know what's right,
Yes,
and we're going to
we
make it
know
right.
what's right.
And to your point, I mean, on the one hand, there is that notion of if you really believe that, if you really believe that babies are getting killed, of course you'd be like, I don't care what public opinion
Yes,
is.
you would
We got to
dedicate your
stop
life
that.
to it.
We got to stop that baby killing. The same as,
Right.
hey, there was a point in this country where people thought slavery was awesome, and it was the minority opinion. And if you actually believed that slavery was wrong, F what the majority believes, I am going to go and change that, regard whether they like it or not. So I get that as a concept, but understand the fascist playbook is I don't care what people think. I know
Very
what
true.
they
And
need,
also,
and I will make them do it.
and you're not talking about democracy.
Yeah, and
Right.
fascism does not like democracy.
No, it does
Kind of
not.
not the point. The best definition I've ever heard of fascism comes from a book called How to Stop Fascism, which I highly recommend. And the
Great
author,
title.
I know, right? I literally
It's
picked
right
it up.
there.
Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm getting this. But the author defines fascism as a fear of freedom triggered
Mm.
by witnessing freedom. And I'm like, whoa, right? Because it's like, okay,
Ooh.
I go to a pride event and I see all these people being who they
Looking so
are
free.
in public.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get
Mm-hmm.
to be who I am in public. Why do you get to be who you are in public? And I get angry and I get scared. And now I want to
Yes.
control what you can be because I don't get to be what I am. That is like the
But why
sentiment
can't you?
behind
It's like,
why
but why
can't I?
can't you?
Oh, I'll tell you why. Because my dad beat the crap out of me every time I stepped out of line, and I came to
Yeah.
respect him for it. Because another thing you'll find is that authoritarianism
That's
starts
not
at
respect,
home.
that's fear.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. Authoritarianism starts at home.
There's yeah.
And one of the
Love
best
and abuse don't
predictors,
exist together.
right?
Yes.
And one of the best
Mhm.
predictors as to whether or not someone is going to vote authoritarianism is how do they treat their kids. If they
Oh, that's
treat
so
their
sad.
kids in a very authoritarian way, if they think that is the right way to treat your kid, and in fact, you are you are failing them if you do not treat them in an authoritarian way, they are far more likely to vote authoritarian. Now, if they grew up in an authoritarian household, well, then it's sort of like, children of abusive parents, they could go a lot of different ways. And there's like 4 or 5 standard
Sure.
roles. There's the appeaser, there's the rebel, right? But if you're the appeaser,
Right.
if you're this is how I get love in my family is by just making sure daddy or mommy
I'm
doesn't have a
doing what I'm
bad
supposed to
day,
do.
right? Because if they have a
Hmm.
bad day, or I need to do that to
It
protect my little
is.
brother, so
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that they
Yeah.
stay in a good mood. Okay, now
Yeah.
if that is how you've learned to survive, then yeah, you see someone out there and they just get to be whoever they want. That's offensive, right? So I think a lot of that gets tied into how we get people saying, yeah, let's do Project 2025. And who cares what public opinion is? Public opinion is wrong. If they grew up in my household, they'd know better.
Ooh, that phrase. That's they would know better. I think that's it. Is it when you say that all that stuff, it just makes me so sad.
Yeah.
Like
And
because
folks like,
I feel so sad for for people who could be free but won't let themselves be.
that is the
And
number
And that's a very like in terms of, in my, my faith or my spirituality is that, that I want them to be free,
Yes.
like, and that because I believe they could be happy.
Are you familiar with
But
Alok?
yeah, yeah,
So Alok talks about this all the time, and it's so amazing to watch him respond to trolls because it is with that exact sentiment. It's like, I feel so
I
sad
feel
that you
so bad for
think
you.
to be beautiful, you need to make me ugly. I really wish that
Yeah,
wasn't true for you. And it's like, it's devastating. And there's so much
it
love in
is.
it.
When you can see the pain that's causing the action,
Yeah.
it
And that,
really, it helps you have more empathy for it. It still sucks and they're still
oh
being
no. And
terrible.
it makes it all
Like,
the more tragic. It would
it's
almost,
still like, yeah,
like I
it's
feel like it would almost be better if they were like born evil, right? Going back to the kind of Christian Catholic kind of like
right,
punishment
Calvinist,
things,
yeah.
right? Where it's like, well, they were just born that way. They're evil. There's nothing you can do about it. But to know, but to go to towards that more like Blackfoot or Six Seeker or Wendat notion of, oh no, they're born good. At some point, they became convinced that who they were is terrible. At some point, they became convinced that they were terrible, and now they're acting out of
Yeah,
that. And it's like, oh my
right.
god, that is tragic to believe that about yourself. And I believed that about myself for a long time. The idea of saying I love
Mm.
myself felt wrong. It just felt wrong. The same way, like, stealing from a store feels wrong. You get that like nervousness. You can feel it in your body somatically, like, oh, I'm doing something naughty. Saying I love myself, giving me a reaction of I'm doing something naughty, that's messed up. But it is a hundred
It is
percent
messed
how I
up.
felt. Right? It took a long
Sure.
time before I could say that without, oh no, that yeah, I do love myself. That actually that tracks. That works. Yeah, it doesn't feel weird at all. How many people
Yeah.
do you really think can say out loud, I love myself and not feel a little weird?
Yeah. Unfortunately, very, not as many as I would
Yeah.
like.
And I think if I had to like pick one thing, I think that's why we're in the mess we're in.
Mm, yeah. Although you should listen to the episode with Ashish,
Hmm.
because at the end of that episode, we talked a little bit. Some of our closing thoughts were, but things are actually better than you think, or they have
Oh,
gotten better.
oh
And
God,
then
yes.
that's like taking time to, especially since negative is so much stickier than positive
Hmm.
for good reason. Like, we're like, oh, remember that tigers will eat you. Like,
Yeah.
for humans, it's a good thing, but headphone, headphone fell. But that, yeah, that like things could be good. Maybe we'll get out of this horse race okay if everyone votes. Anyway.
Well, no, and the thing is, I program. My friend Mike O'Brien once said, "Misery will schedule itself," and so like I
Ha,
program
I like
good
that.
news. I have websites I go to that are giving, and it's not fluff pieces. It's like legit good news. Did you know we cured blindness? Because that's a thing we did. So if you were
That's
born,
wild.
if it's genetic blindness,
Hmm.
there are cures now, like genetic cures now for frickin' blindness. That did not make the news in any big way, and it's not like
That's
all forms of
wild.
blindness or anything like that, but like a
Sure.
lot.
It's like this very niche things, but
And it's like you would think
for
that
the
would have
kid
been a
who
big
had
story.
that, yeah, yeah.
and there's
There's some good
there's
news
tons of
sometimes.
like oh, we just saved this thing that was almost extinct. Like that's every other
Oh yeah,
freaking
the
day I'm
things that
reading those
aren't,
things.
yeah, that like, so many things. Yeah, when I was a kid, it was like we're not gonna have any animals left,
Oh yeah,
and
there's a lot of things like, oh,
they've
we haven't seen
actually
one of
like
these in a
done a lot
hundred
of work.
years, and they're back now. And it's like, and
What?
honestly,
Yeah.
part of the reason, part of the reason to do that is because I think just to be mentally healthy, you need more of a balance, but also
Yeah.
because I want to honor the people that took work. All right, curing
Oh yeah.
blindness took work. Keeping that animal from the
Yeah.
brink of extinction took work. Having Germany run
Hmm.
on renewables for a week took work. And I want to honor the people who put
Very
in that
cool.
work. Because I think what I feel bad about when people sort of like, oh yeah, everything's terrible, we haven't made any progress, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yo, do you have any idea how hard people had to work for people to even notice that black people were being killed by the cops? Because that was happening
Hmm.
for a long time and nobody
For a
even
long time.
knew. Nobody even knew. All right. People had to work
Yeah.
hard just to get to that point. And then to get to the point where you have at least some duties that should not be in police offices being pulled out and put into other things. Some places
Hmm.
actually being defunded. Have you seen Camden, New Jersey? Like that took work. And people who worked very hard and risked their lives to do these things. So I feel like to just blanketly be like, "There's no hope. You can't do anything." You're kind of like crapping on a lot of really hard work by a lot of people, buddy.
Yeah, right. It's like it's almost kind of a jerk move.
Yeah,
A little
and it's
bit.
like, and again,
A little
people
bit of a
always
jerk
want to be
move.
like, oh, if you say anything's good, you want us to be complacent. It's like, no, what I'm actually saying, that's a call to
No.
action. Hey, look at this thing
Well,
we
and
accomplished. Do you know how much more we'd accomplish if you joined in? That's what that's
yes,
saying.
yes, yes, and I liked what you said. So it's, pointing it out and appreciating it is it ties back into the, you know, the culture of the internet that has been created that everything is a judgment,
Yes,
and that it's like it must be good or bad. It's like,
yes.
no, let's live in the land of context. Let's live in the land of, discourse and discussion and ideas, and because people are really interesting and weird and do cool and weird stuff. And like, how neat is that?
Yeah, that's what the
And
early
so,
web was. It was just this weird art gallery where you have like Homestar Runner and you couldn't personalize the page. It's like,
mhm,
this is fun and weird. Let's just put it out there and see what people do with it, right? I mean, going back to, yeah, and I think I think the web could, if designed for it, actually enhance all of those things. Because the funny thing is, on the one hand, the web lets us polarize to our heart's extent and cubicle and all that. But by
yeah,
the exact same methodology, gives us access to more knowledge and perspectives than ever in human history. We could learn
yes,
more than we ever could, and quicker, frankly. We don't. We tried it. We just basically we have access to the world's biggest TV library, and we're just watching reruns.
we're just only friends.
Yeah, exactly. It's like saying, "Hey, we've got 100,000 television shows. Yeah, but I'm just gonna keep rewatching the X Files because I like the X Files. And don't get me wrong, I do like the X Files, but there are other
Sure,
shows."
there are other things. Yes, I think it's yeah. Look, read something you didn't expect to read.
Yeah, I in the
Encourage
early days of the
bookstore
web,
browsing.
I had this fantasy of what I called an anti recommendation engine that would sort of like take all
Mm.
this like data because
Stumble
you have a lot of
away
data
instead of stumble upon.
exactly and say, okay, well, given your preferences, whatever kind of bullshit social profile you want to create for me, given that, here is a thing that you would never encounter, and we're going to show it to you. Like I would love that. Like it's the next best thing is just random website, which was a website for a while, and I loved it. But
Random website, yeah.
but barring that, to say, hey, if I just keep doing my passive thing and following the people I follow and the news sources and the new blah 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 blah, here's something I can pretty much guarantee you'll never learn about. So let me just show it to you because I know you're a curious person and you like the idea of what you don't know, taking that and putting it into the bucket of, okay, I know this thing exists now, and if I want to learn more, I can. That's the part that I find engaging, and that the web is 100% not built to do. The web is 100% saying, oh, you like X Files? How about more X Files?
Yes,
What a
well
waste! What a
designed with the
waste!
businesses stuff. Yeah. So good talking to you.
It's so great
As
talking to you too.
as I suspected, we talked a while.
I can't
Can
wait
you
to see how you
please?
try to summarize this episode.
Oh
Because that's a
yeah.
challenge for
Well,
me when
don't
I do
worry.
these
There's a
things. It's sort
button.
of like, yeah, exactly. Have fun with that.
Um, but I invite you to anything that what would you like to hype? I know you might want to remind people about,
Yes,
the movie.
I will keep it simple. Go to whitemeatmovie.com slash help, and you will see all the different ways that you can help make this movie a reality. And I will let you go on that journey from there, and I will encourage you to pledge to our Kickstarter campaign now so that on day one we open with record numbers and everyone else decides to hop on board and fund it. So whitemeatmovie.com slash help. You'll see all the different ways you can help out there. And yeah, that's just one thing. Focus on that.
There you go. And then I will, because I'm trying to remember to do this, I remind people that this podcast does have an Instagram at techcult.podcast. on YouTube at Tech Cult Podcast. Please like and subscribe. Tell a friend. There's also, I made a Patreon because if you want to give me money,
Hey,
I don't want to stop you. And so that is also slash Tech Cult Podcast. And I want to thank Corey for being my first patron. So thank you for doing
hey.
that. And yeah, so thank you for listening to Ignore All Previous Instructions. And until next time, thanks so much for coming on, Dave.
Thank you for having me.